In the original story of Peter Pan, Peter murders members of the Lost Boys when they grow too old. He did this because being an adult was against the rules in Neverland. In the middle of battles with pirates, Peter would also switch sides to kill members of the Lost Boys just for fun. Up until the 1800s, Turkish women who were accused of cheating on their husbands were tied up in a sack filled with cats, then thrown in the ocean. In 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan was kidnapped while hitchhiking in California. She was locked in a box the size of a coffin under her kidnapper's bed for 7 years. She had to lie still and couldn't make any noise for 23 hours a day in pitch-black darkness. Her kidnapper was only caught when his wife finally reported him to police. In December of 1980, a 19-year-old girl from Minnesota was involved in a car accident in sub-zero temperatures. After the crash, her car wouldn't start, so she walked towards a friend's house who lived 2 miles away. When she was just 15 feet from her friend's front door, she collapsed. That night, temperatures dropped to negative 30 degrees Celsius, and no one was around to help her. 6 hours later, she was discovered frozen solid. She was immediately transported to a nearby hospital, but her skin was too hard to even pierce with a needle. Amazingly, she was still alive, but her pulse was only measured at 12 beats per minute. Hoping for a miracle, doctors wrapped her in a heated blanket, and 2 hours later, she regained consciousness. After 49 days in the hospital, she completely recovered and suffered no permanent damage to any part of her body. The Scold's Bridle was a device that was used to publicly humiliate women until the 19th century. On the inside, the device had a metal plate that would press down on the tongue and prevent the wearer from speaking. It was placed on women who were said to be troublesome to keep them quiet and prevent them from gossiping. This is a powerful photo of a starving Ugandan boy holding the hand of a missionary in 1980. For many years, the lead singer of Lynyrd Skynyrd told his bandmates that he wouldn't live to the age of 30. His dad reported that even when he was a child, Ronnie would often say, "Daddy, I'll never be 30 years old." When his father asked why he kept saying this, Ronnie would just reply, "Daddy, that's my limit." Sure enough, when he was 29 years old, Ronnie Van Zant died in a plane crash. In 2017, a billionaire from Brazil announced that he was gonna bury his Bentley for his afterlife. After receiving a lot of online hate for his wasteful decision, he revealed that it was simply a publicity stunt for organ donations. He said people bury things that are much more valuable than cars and nobody seems to care. Patty Mallet became pregnant at age 17 and was pressured by multiple people to abort the baby, but she refused. That baby was Justin Bieber. The Titanic fired 8 emergency flares before it sank. A ship in the area saw the flares and that the boat looked uneven in the water. But the captain didn't believe that the rockets were fired in distress, so he didn't take action. If he had, all of the Titanic's passengers could have been rescued, but instead help didn't arrive for more than 2 hours.
Hey Ginger, can you please tell them to subscribe? Tell them to subscribe, please. Subscribe, please.
In 1941, Soviet archaeologists wanted to open up the tomb of Timur, aka Tamerlane. He was a Turco-Mongol conqueror from the 14th century who is often regarded as one of the greatest military leaders of all time. However, locals urged the Soviets not to do so since it was believed that opening the tomb would curse the world. This was mainly due to the inscription on his tomb which read, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." And inside his casket, there was another mysterious note that read, "Whoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I." But despite the warnings, Joseph Stalin ordered for Tamerlane's body to be exhumed. Just 3 days later, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded the Soviet Union. In 1856, a woman died just after giving birth to a Greek monk named Mihailo Tolotos. The very next day, the baby was taken to a monastery on top of Mount Athos. He then spent his entire 82-year life completely isolated from women. He's the only known man in history to have lived and died without ever seeing a woman. While this may look like a regular city upon first glance, it's actually the world's largest cemetery. Located in Iraq, the Valley of Peace contains over 5 million bodies. Joseph Matheny was a serial killer from Baltimore who was active from the 1970s till the 1990s. Following his arrest, Joseph not only confessed to killing numerous men and women, he also claimed that he used their meat in the burgers that he sold out of his food truck.
So people ate the burgers without knowing that it was human meat.
This is a comparison of a pug in 1880 versus what the breed looks like today. The pug was selectively bred to feature an extremely flat face, which has contributed to severe breathing difficulties as well as eye problems in many of these dogs. If a person dies on a plane during a flight, their body is typically moved to an empty first-class seat until the plane lands. After the Titanic disaster, the U.S. Congress passed a law requiring passenger vessels to carry more lifeboats. But the added weight made one ship called the SS Eastland too top-heavy. In 1915, the ship capsized before even leaving the dock, killing 844 people. In 2018, a 66-year-old Canadian man was arrested for murdering 8 people over a 7-year span. During that time, he worked as a mall Santa in Toronto. In 1932 Arizona, a man dressed as Santa Claus jumped out of a plane to parachute into a Christmas parade. Sadly, his parachute failed to open and hundreds of parents had to cover their kids' eyes as Santa plummeted to his death. This is a photo of a man dressed as Santa Claus visiting dying workplace children in a hospital ward in 1906. In December of 1959, a man from Los Angeles murdered his wife with a hammer before taking his own life, all while his 3 kids watched in horror. For the next 50 years, the house went completely untouched, as all of the Christmas decorations were still visible from the windows. Josephine Myrtle was born in 1868 with a rare genetic anomaly known as diphagus. Her body was completely normal down to the waist, but below it she had 2 pelvises and 4 legs. This is what toilets looked like in many medieval castles. There were a few cases of assassins climbing up these poop chutes and waiting for their targets to sit down before killing them. In 1977, the drummer for Lynyrd Skynyrd survived the plane crash that killed half the band. He then walked to a nearby house for help only to be shot by the homeowner. He apparently saw a bloody long-haired man and fired a warning shot that hit the drummer in the shoulder. Once Pyle shouted that there was a crash, the farmer helped him and he went on to fully recover. In the 1920s, not much was known about the effects of radium. So when a group of women were paid to use glow-in-the-dark radioactive paint, they were told that it was completely harmless. But after years of licking the tips of their paintbrushes while using this radium-based paint, the devastating effects eventually became obvious. Many of these women developed a condition known as radium jaw, which caused horrible tumors around the mouth, and some of their jaws would literally fall off. The ancient Romans would often substitute criminals into plays for punishment. So if a character died in the story, a real criminal would die on stage. The ancient Aztecs built swords out of obsidian, which is said to be 50 times sharper than surgical steel. These swords were apparently sharp enough to decapitate not only a human with one strike, but also a horse. This is a photo of Anne Frank's father Otto revisiting the attic where they hid from the Nazis. Sadly, he was the only surviving member of the family, as his 2 daughters died just weeks before their camp was liberated. In 1783, a boy was born with 2 heads, but one of the heads was upside down. Surprisingly, the other head was somewhat functional, and the boy even claimed that he could hear the other brain talking to him. Tigers are some of the most vengeful animals on the planet and will take revenge on anyone who has wronged them. In 1997, a Russian poacher shot a tiger and left him for dead before stealing part of his meal. The tiger later found the poacher's cabin and waited 12 hours for him to arrive before killing and eating him. In 2016, a Somalian suicide bomber brought explosives onto a commercial flight with the intent of blowing up the plane. 20 minutes after takeoff, the explosives detonated and blasted a hole in the side of the plane. The bomber was instantly sucked out and ended up being the only fatality. In 1832, a man named John Rennie personally designed and carved his own headstone before dying. It's an acrostic puzzle that reads, "Here lies John Rennie, 46,000 different ways." In 1993, a Canadian lawyer named Gary Hoy claimed to a group of students that the windows in his building were unbreakable. To prove this, he threw himself at the window at full force. While the glass didn't break, the frame popped out, and Gary fell 24 stories down to his death. Steve Jobs could have avoided a premature death from cancer by having it properly treated. Instead, he refused surgery for 9 months and favored dietary treatments and other alternatives. Shortly before he died, he claimed that it was one of his biggest life regrets. With a 9% fatality rate, being the president is by far the most dangerous job in America. Hours before his death, Edgar Allan Poe was acting delirious in the streets of Baltimore. He was wearing another man's clothing and was unable to explain how he got there. While many ideas have been put forth, his cause of death remains a mystery to this day. During World War II, Allied forces accidentally sunk a ship carrying concentration camp survivors, killing about 5,000 of them. This photo was taken on the morning of April 15, 1912, just a few miles south of where the Titanic went down. The steward who took the photo had not yet heard about the sinking of the Titanic. What caught his attention was the smear of red paint across the base of the iceberg, indicating that it had collided with a ship. Little did he know there were about 1,500 dead bodies in the depths below him. In 1962, a Cuban boxer named Benny Paret made fun of his opponent Emil Griffith for being a homosexual. Griffith ended up beating Paret so badly that he fell into a coma and died 10 days after the fight. In 2007, a woman woke up in the middle of a surgery where doctors were removing one of her eyes. She was aware of everything going on for hours but couldn't tell the doctors to stop. She says the experience was so horrific that she thought she had died and gone to hell. As horrible as the Holocaust was, one man truly stood out as one of the most evil of all Nazis involved. Dr. Joseph Mengele was tasked with conducting genetic research on human subjects at Auschwitz concentration camp. His work focused primarily on twins, with very little regard for the safety or suffering of his patients. Some of his horrific experiments included removing organs without anesthesia, injecting toxic dye into eyeballs, and even sewing twins together at the skin. Most of his patients ended up dying after these operations, but those who didn't often wish they had. What's perhaps most disturbing is that after the Holocaust, Dr. Mengele escaped to South America, where many say he continued his brutal experiments in a less organized manner. He lived for more than 30 years after the end of the war, and died on a beach in Brazil. You can literally die from pooping too hard, and it's actually pretty common. Nearly all cases involve people with bad hearts who just pushed a little too hard. One of the most notable people who died this way is Elvis Presley. Up until the 1950s, cigarettes were used to treat people with asthma along with other pulmonary conditions. 30 years ago, you had about 17 minutes to escape a house fire. Today, that's down to about 3 to 4 minutes due to many of the highly flammable synthetic materials used in furniture. After a mass shooting, you would expect complete silence at the scene of the crime. But police say one of the eeriest things is all of the phones that ring when family members are trying to find out if their loved ones are okay. In 1969, an astrologer warned John Lennon that he would be shot on an island. John was so disturbed by this that it caused him to cancel an upcoming yacht trip around the Greek islands. 11 years later, John Lennon would be shot and killed on the island of Manhattan. It is estimated that there are still approximately 40 million slaves in the world today. About 70% of them are women, while 25% of them are children. The Bunker brothers were a pair of conjoined twins who made the term Siamese twins popular. They were a famous sideshow act in North Carolina until one day one of the brothers woke up to find that his twin had died. In a panic, he called for a doctor to perform an emergency separation, but it was already too late. He would die just 3 hours after his brother. Pablo Picasso used to carry around a revolver loaded with blanks, and when people asked him about the meaning of his paintings, he would pretend to shoot them in the face. In 2012, 66-year-old Stevie Crecelius went to the hospital thinking he had a kidney stone. During that visit, he would find out that he actually had a strange condition and had been a woman his whole life. Nicolas Cage has already bought his grave, and it's a 9-foot-tall pyramid in Louisiana. Whiskey distiller Jack Daniel died after kicking his safe because he forgot his combination. He injured his big toe and it got infected, so he had to have his foot amputated. But the infection spread to the rest of his system and he died from complications. On 9/11, there was only one American in space. And this is the photo he took from the International Space Station. The first person to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge was a professional high diver. He wanted to demonstrate that people don't die simply from falling through the air, and he was correct. He fell 135 feet through the air without a problem, but hitting the water killed him immediately. Masabumi Hosono was the only Japanese passenger on the Titanic, and he managed to survive the sinking. But after returning to his home country, he was publicly condemned and lost his job for not going down with the other passengers. President JFK's brain has been missing from the National Archives for more than 50 years. Stanley Meyer was one of the first to invent a car that was completely powered by water. He claimed that it was capable of traveling across the country on just 72 liters of tap water, which would have revolutionized the auto industry and made gasoline obsolete. But shortly after creating the car, Stanley died while meeting with investors. His brother said he ran out of the restaurant choking, looked at him and said, "They've poisoned me." This is a photo of Otto Warmbier begging for mercy while on trial for stealing a propaganda poster in North Korea. He returned to the US with irreversible brain damage and died 6 years later. This is the crevice where Aaron Ralston cut off his own arm to free himself after being trapped by a massive boulder. He did it using nothing but a dull pocket knife, and the movie 127 Hours is based on his triumph. During a 1998 soccer match in the Republic of Congo, a lightning bolt struck one of the goal pitches. It killed all 11 members of the home team, who were all wearing metal spikes. The other team was left completely unscathed, for they had all been wearing rubber cleats. When Ben Franklin's London home was renovated in 1998, 15 human bodies, including 6 children, were discovered in the basement. Archaeologists agree that they were buried at the same time Franklin had been living in the home. While police initially thought it was the work of a serial killer, the bodies were likely stolen by his friend William Hewson so that he could study anatomy. When Joseph Stalin was dying, his private physician was not available. This is because he was already being tortured in the KGB headquarters for suggesting that Stalin get more bed rest. A Thai woman once accidentally slipped on mud, grabbed a naked live wire, and was electrocuted to death. After the funeral, her sister was showing her neighbors how the accident happened. Suddenly, she herself slipped, grabbed the same live wire, and was also electrocuted to death. A teen boy injected himself with mercury at least 3 times while attempting to convert his bones into metal after watching X-Men Origins Wolverine. He was also intentionally bitten by spiders multiple times so that he could become Spider-Man. This endangered baby dolphin died shortly after this photo was taken because swimmers were passing it around for selfies. A man once threw a mouse into a pile of burning leaves. The mouse then ran into the man's home while still on fire and burned the entire house down. When people are electrocuted and thrown far distances, it is the result of sudden violent muscle contractions, not the shock itself. This has raised questions about the actual strength and subconscious capabilities of the muscles of the human body. This is a photo of a rubber worker in the Belgian Congo staring at the severed hands and feet of his 5-year-old daughter. She was murdered because he failed to meet his quota for the day. Today, the photo serves as a stark reminder of the brutality that came with colonialism. If we held a minute of silence for every victim of the Holocaust, we would be silent for 11.5 years. This is a photo of 2 autistic boys strapped to a radiator in a mental hospital in 1982. While filming the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980, photographer Robert Landsberg realized he had no chance of surviving it. So he wound the film back, put his camera in his backpack, and laid on top of it to protect the film for future researchers.